Hey guys, back at it again with another video. I'm really excited. This week we are going to dive into evictions and how to do that successfully as a landlord or property manager. I'm Daniel Bell. I own Stonebrook Properties. I manage 200 rentals in Knoxville, Tennessee and the surrounding East Tennessee area. And let's jump in and learn more about how I handle this. Please keep in mind, I'm not an attorney. I'm just using the experience that I've had over the past 3 years in property management. I've done about 4 of these in the past 3 years. My landlords often buy distressed properties and I have tenants that I absorb, and most of our evictions happen based on absorbing a distressed property that has a distressed tenant that we need to move out in order to fix up the property, renovate it, and get it back on market for lease. So let's jump in the video, learn some more things about evictions and property management. Let's go. Evictions can be like super scary. And I get a lot of calls from people that I actually don't manage for, and they call me and asking me for advice on this. So that's ultimately why I'm creating this video, so I can maybe send this to them after getting off the phone call, explaining exactly what we're going to go over in this video, but allow them to have it for another reference after we jump off the call so they can feel a little less stressed, because ultimately evictions, as a landlord, if you have valid reason in the state of Tennessee in 2025, is fairly easy and fairly fast. So don't get stressed. It's something that all landlords will eventually have to deal with. Some of the best deals you're going to find on and off market are going to be properties that are distressed, and they will probably be coming with a tenant that has a story. So the point of an eviction is to basically get your possession back as soon as possible to the property so that you can stabilize it, ultimately get a paying tenant inside of the rental, and potentially get a vacant unit. Typically an eviction is happening because the tenant currently under the lease is not paying rent. However, there are other reasons to evict a tenant based on simply the lease. So if someone is not following the lease, that is grounds for an eviction typically. This video is primarily on the variable of a tenant not paying rent and you needing to get them out so that way you can get a new tenant inside the unit in order to start collecting rent on time monthly. All right, video timeline. Number 1, we're gonna go over general process of an eviction. Number 2, we're gonna go over just your top questions and the top questions I get asked when I have self-managing landlords call me and ask for advice. I'm gonna give you some of those tidbits and answers that I have given others in the past. Number 3, must-haves for successful eviction. Number 4, we're going to shotgun out some just quick tips on things that I have done so that way you may avoid eviction in the first place. Number 5, I'm going to actually give away a free resource at the end of this video. So stick around, learn more about what we're going to give away. So let's just get into the next part of the video. Eviction process. So some will argue where this starts, ultimately where it begins. But I would say when rent is late, that first day that your lease states that rent is late is when an eviction process may or may not begin. Just so you know, currently in 2025 in the state of Tennessee, you cannot charge more than 10% of outstanding balance. So if a tenant has $1,000 rent and they owe $1,000 right now, you cannot charge more than 10%, being $100. Of late fees for this month. The next phase of this is obviously you giving a letter. This may be a 14 or 30-day notice depending on what your lease states. You're going to want to make sure that you do that through direct mail or at least putting it physically on the front door and taking a photo for your records. The notice is finished up. So, the 14 or 30-day notice has finished up. There may be still a balance owed, and at that point, you'd be filing a detainer warrant, so at that point, when the notice has finished up and there's a balance owed from the tenant, the next step in the eviction process is actually going down to the county clerk's office and filing a detainer warrant. That is basically fancy words for saying, hey, I want to go to court and I want to get my possession back of the property. At this point, you're just going to wait for a court date. You might have to call in, depending on the county, weekly to find out when that's getting scheduled. Depending on the county, it's very similar to like traffic violation court. When you go there, if you're representing yourself as a landlord, you'll kind of feel a little calmer when you arrive, because you'll realize it's not like some crazy courtroom. There's obviously no jury. It's simply you in front of a judge. They rip them out in Knox County quite fast, and there are a lot of people there in your similar position as a landlord and property manager. So you will see that you're not the only person dealing with this problem, and oftentimes, hopefully, that kind of like de-escalates the situation and keeps your stress a little lower. I've been to the Knox County courts 2 times, as I've had the other 2 evictions in other counties. Knox County to me is the easiest and fastest. They don't want to waste time. There's going to be a lot of people there, so it's going to just like be like a machine gun, getting people through and basically figuring out who's guilty, who's not guilty. So once you're at the courthouse and you're in front of the judge, the 2 things I would recommend you always having on hand is your lease and the lease ledger. A lease ledger is just the balance owed from the tenant, assuming that you're going into this because of the tenant not paying rent. At that point, based on the proof that you have being the lease and the lease ledger, so the lease showing the rules of the lease and the lease ledger showing the balance owed, you will, 99.9%, from my opinion as a property manager, you will win that and you will gain possession. At the finish line is a writ of possession. So when you leave that courthouse, it's important that you don't just run over to the property and think it's yours because you've won that court case. You have won, but you have not gained your writ of possession, which is like, think of it like a deed or like a marriage certificate. It's an actual like certificate that you've gained possession back, and you do not have that in hand just by winning the court case and leaving the courthouse. You have to wait for that, and the sheriff will actually reach out to you. Sometimes, I will be honest, like some of the counties are a little less organized, so you may want to keep up on that on your own. So you'll be calling in and trying to get a writ of possession. The sheriff will most likely meet you at the property to hand you that document, and then they will assist you getting the tenant out if they have not left already. And honestly, that's kind of the eviction process. So it's really not that complicated, or there's not that many steps as well. So that's really the eviction process. It's not very complicated, and it's pretty short process. It's just the days in between of waiting that can create a lot of emotion and stress. So, if you want people to help you out, obviously an attorney is going to be the ultimate person that can help you in court. But property managers like myself can also be a great resource to get that whole thing started. So, 6 phases. The rent's late. You give a notice. The notice has been finished up. Now you're going to go down, file the detainer warrant. Then you're going to go to court. Then you're going to, assuming you win, wait for writ of possession, see the sheriff in person at the property, gain possession back. That is an eviction. So now let's go over the top questions I get asked by landlords in general. Number 1, how long does it take to get someone out of my rental? Well, that is kind of a tough answer to say. It will range. Now, if you give a notice and it's a 14-day notice and a tenant simply leaves, then 14 days. They may even leave beforehand if they're super upset or realize they're in a tough situation, or obviously have somewhere to go in the first place. So it can be under 2 weeks and you can get possession back. However, if you go through the full eviction process and you do not have a lease that states that the notice is 14 days, it will be defaulted to 30 days by the state of Tennessee. So if you have to give notice and there is no lease on file, or the lease on file does not have a specific statement around how long a notice will be given, it defaults to 30 days. So you would give a 30-day notice. At the end of the 30 days, if the tenant is not gone, you would file a detainer warrant. Depending on how quick the courts get scheduled, it could be 1 to 2 weeks, or it could be 4 to even 8 additional weeks. So now your total time involved in this is now 60 to 90 days. And then you wait for writ of possession, assuming you've won at court. That I've seen take up to an additional 2 weeks for the sheriff's department to kind of reach out, get you scheduled, because they've got a lot of other things going on than just writ of possessions. They obviously patrol the whole county and have plenty of other crimes and situations that they deal with. So meeting you out with a writ of possession to get your former tenant gone, not necessarily at the top, not necessarily at the bottom of their to-do list, but it can take some time. So, worst case scenario, you're in a unorganized county outside of Knox County, one that has, smaller and less resources, and they may not host a court date as often. And then obviously the sheriff's department would be smaller in that situation. And, I'm naming all the negative things about that, but oftentimes, the counties that are smaller can move fast as well. There's benefits there. But worst case scenario, from 30-day notice given, now you're at day 30, 31, another, let's say 45 days until court, and then another 4 weeks. So you're at like 12 weeks total. So still 12 times. Yeah, so sub 90 days, it'd be 84 days at worst case scenario to gain possession back, assuming that you're lawfully doing this and you have the proof in the pudding that it needed to occur. So number 2, why can't I have my house back immediately? Well, you've given possession to somebody based on that lease that's been signed that you don't have the possession anymore. So they have rights to the usage of the property. And so you are just simply fighting for those rights back because the lease was broken. If the lease was not broken, they would still have rights, and then you cannot just come into that house unannounced and trying to take it back. Otherwise, no one would want to be a renter in the first place if they had zero rights. It'd be a silly concept and everyone would own their house themselves. Number 3, what are all the fees involved? What's the typical eviction cost? And in my opinion, an eviction costs more on the losses of the opportunity loss is greater from no revenue coming in compared to the actual fees you're going to be paying to get this done. So my company, we typically charge between $450 for the service, and that involves us filing all the documents with the county clerk's office. It involves us going physically to the property to drop off notices. It also involves us going to court, and it also involves us being at the property when we gain writ of possession at the finish line in order to do the turnover and get the property stabilized to then be leased once again. So fairly inexpensive. You may be able to negotiate that lower or have other companies be higher. Now, the other cost that you may incur as a self-managing landlord compared to working with a property manager like myself would be just court costs and an attorney. So those just range. I've seen as expensive in Knox County as like $1,000 for an attorney, and I've seen as cheap as $400 to $500. And then the court costs would be $100 to $200 in total. So at worst case scenario, you're looking at $1,200 when you're doing it yourself with an attorney. However, you can represent yourself if you own the property. So, court costs, that would primarily be the only fee. You just simply aren't getting revenue in because there's a tenant sitting in the property not paying rent, which is the most expensive thing on this entire story. Don't get nervous because evictions are fairly cheap. They probably don't even match the cost of 1 month rent that's on your lease. So keep that in mind, keep positive in this situation that you're in, and just power through it. It's an emotional journey. It is still super emotional for the tenant as well. So, keep that in your mind when you're trying to communicate with them in order to try to get them out sooner, because oftentimes one of the highest leverage parts of an eviction is being able to ask the tenant, do you really want this on your record? Because it will pull up the next time they go and apply for another unit, and it may not allow them to get approved. So the ability for that tenant to move on, it's a win-win if they leave early because it's not on their record. So moving on to number 4, what is step 1 of an eviction? Well, step 1 is giving notice. You can't even go down and file a detainer warrant before you give proper notice to that tenant. So that would be based on late rent, and that would be a physical letter in the mail. It would have to be certified mail, or I also recommend going to the property yourself, taping it on the front and back door, same document, and taking a photo. I take 2 photos. I take the photo where you can, really clearly read the document, and then one a little further out just to show the scene, so that way they know, like, hey, I'm at the correct door, and no one's gonna pull any dumb statements in the court where they're like, well, it wasn't my door. And none of that can happen because I have 2 photos, one of the document clearly readable, number 2 somewhere far enough away where you can still zoom in to read the document enough, but you can see the surrounding area to tell that yes, that is the property, that is the correct property, and it's on all entrances of the property. So based on someone reasonably living in that unit, they would be able to get that letter. Number 6, are there ways to get someone out without evicting? There are a ton of legal ways to do this. So number 1, if you think you have to go through the eviction process just because or the rent is late, that's not necessarily true. You can do an abandonment letter. So an abandonment letter, from my knowledge and how I use it in the past, is a 10-day solution if you believe the property does not have a tenant at it. This often comes into play when you actually think they don't live there full time, and going through the courts, dealing with that potential, 60 to 90 day eviction might not be the right route. So the abandonment letter basically says, hey, when you put it on the door, take a photo of it, it will basically say, hey, we don't think anyone lives here anymore. And in 10 days, if you do not reach out to us, we are going to take possession back automatically. And at that point, from my understanding, you can go in, change the locks, take back possession without going through the whole eviction process. And a lot of times I've had that work, and it's kept us from having to charge a landlord to go through the whole eviction process. And we've gotten the property back sooner and been able to stabilize it and get it released. So that is like a huge win that I do not see a lot of people use, and it is very, very strong. So another way is to just properly control your late fees. A lot of times an eviction happens because a tenant doesn't believe the consequences. And I have just spoken to somebody that is a landlord. They own 3 rentals. They've been overly nice on late rent, and how that goes about and how they communicate with the tenant just entirely has been way too accommodating for the tenant. And the landlord is now having to go to properties, pick up checks, have those checks bounced. Like, we have a lot of rules in our onboarding, so that way no one that's unreasonable would even be able to get into a rental in the first place. However, it happens. But the point is if you have a high standard, you're going to get decent, if not amazing tenants. And one of our standards is just, we don't take checks and we don't take cash. We take money order, we take cashier's checks, and we do online ACH payments, which is where 90% of our tenants are making their rent payment. I will say that if you do late rent, I'll get into this in the quick tips. And the final top question I get asked is, what do I do and how do I evict somebody if I do not have a lease? It's pretty simple. It's step 1 is the only difference, and that's just issuing a 30-day notice compared to a 14-day notice. So that's the power of having somebody in a lease at all times, is to make sure that they're following the rules of that lease. Otherwise, basically everything defaults to the state guidelines. And the state guideline says to give someone a 30-day notice. 16 days longer than if you were to provide a 14-day notice. And other than that, detainer warrant, go to court, win, writ of possession, get to the property. So as much as people try to make this process seem like super scary, the first time I did it, I was under a lot of anxiety because I had perceived that the eviction process was just like absolutely scary and horrible and complicated. But now that I've done it, 4 times in the past 3 years, I feel pretty confident and I don't really get stressed about it anymore. I get bummed because we got to do it, because it's no fun to have to kick somebody out, and it's obviously not always our fault, but you can be in a position where you're a property manager and you're just hoping that the property cash flows for that landlord no matter what. And because you care and you work through these problems every day, you're always hoping that you can solve it without an eviction. All right, pretty important part here: must-haves for a successful eviction. Three things. Always have a signed lease. Always have the ledger. And then number three, always have tenant driver's licenses and social security numbers for future use to get damages back. You can go back to civil court in order to try to get the damages that you've accrued, being late rent and unpaid balance, and the damages physically done to the property. And that will be done at a later date. It is important to have that information. Otherwise, people are ghosts and you won't be able to find them as easily. And having that information will help you track them down. If the courts will track them down if you have that as well, to go to civil court. There's a lot more I can have conversation on, but for the most part, I would just recommend having the driver's license. And the lease ledger allows you just to show proof that there's unpaid balance. The collections agency will have more leverage to get that debt paid on. Let's move on to the next part of this video, which will be just quick tips. So let's shotgun out some ideas. The eviction process can go a lot of different directions in conversation because you got leases involved, you have processes for move-in involved, you have processes for the turnover. Even during the eviction, there's ways to cut costs. So let's jump in with the tips that I've written down here. Got three of them. So number one, always have all tenants on one lease. So to basically keep things simple, even if it's a whole bunch of college students moving in and wanting to rent, per room, it's important that you keep it pretty basic and have all names on one lease, and then you only have to evict that lease. That way, when it comes to collections, it gets sent out to everyone equally, and there's not a lot of argument that can be made, because if you have multiple leases inside of a unit, court system, it could get very complicated with possession, and it can also get really complicated with who caused the damage and who's going to take blame. So keeping one lease with all tenants on that single lease is just a great way to avoid really complicated situations that could turn into some heavy expenses as the landlord. Number two, call local collections companies. So that one is one of the tips that I almost was like, I don't want to give that one out. But truthfully, I'm not here to sell you anything but getting your time back. Hire us for property management so you don't have to do it. If you like doing it, great. And one of the key things that I've done was just going onto Google, calling up all the collection companies in the area, trying to figure out which one could mesh with our property management company the best. And we had found one that basically allows us to use their attorney at heavily discounted prices, even free sometimes when the collections account is heavy. So meaning, the person owes quite a bit of money, and we can get that amount of money. Can happen a lot of different ways. We can argue all day if that should have happened in the first place. But at the end of the day, somebody has a large collections account, which I would consider, over $2,000. That is something that a collections company will be very interested in helping you obtain back. And they may have resources at discounted or free prices for you as a landlord to use. And so call them first, see if they have an attorney that specializes in evictions, and basically, avoid paying me. That's fine. Number three would be document your notices. If you are not taking photos of the letters you're dropping off in person or using direct certified mail, you will probably catch your tail between your legs in court eventually, because the number one thing someone could really argue when they know they're late on rent and have not paid the balance to zero is typically saying, I didn't know, I didn't hear, I didn't see, no one called me, no one told me about it. And so if you have those documented notices on the property for the use of the courts to show proof, you're going to be in a way better position. So those are kind of my three tips to making sure this goes smooth for you. I'm really happy with the court system in Tennessee currently in 2025. I just think that if you do it right, you shouldn't have any issue getting someone out of the property. I've never seen a professional tenant know how to delay the system so that way they can live in the property longer. And I frankly think it's because there's not a lot of like back roadmaps to getting that to happen in the first place, which means while we have a good balance of tenant rights and landlord rights, we need to take advantage and use the system properly in order to keep it that way. Because the number one way that laws change are when people abuse them. And so I think that if landlords try to abuse the system and there's too much free will for the landlord to do that, then obviously more tenant rights come. And I'm not against those things. I just think that Tennessee right now has a really good mix of both. And one example of that would be tenants have the right to repair something and send that bill to the landlord. And if the landlord doesn't pay them back, the tenant can take them to court and show the damages that they incurred based on having to repair it themselves. So that's actually kind of interesting because a lot of times tenants think they have the right to withhold rent, and that's not necessarily the case. Read it up on your own. You know, we can go into this all day of semantics, but that's how I read the law. And so let's just finish it up with a big resource I want to hand out, and let's talk about it now. So if you're sitting here reading this and you're in a situation or you think you're going to be soon in a situation where you're going to need to evict somebody, the number one step is giving notice. So step one, give a 14, 30-day notice depending on your situation. Reach out to me by email. It's daniel@stonebrookmgmt.com. Subject line YouTube eviction. That way I know, where this email is coming from, because if I see like a random eviction email, I'll get nervous. So just put YouTube eviction and I'll know to ask you a few questions and then send you the letter that you may need. And I'll just send that for free. Doesn't bother me at all. The number one thing I sell is time. I just look at myself like a lawn mowing company. If you want to mow your own lawn, great, go do it. If you want us to mow your lawn, then great, we'll do it. But at the end of the day, I'm not trying to withhold information so that way you can't succeed and you call me to hire me. I'm actually trying to give you the information so if you want to mow your own lawn, you can properly. But if you realize you don't want to, you may want to learn from the guy that obviously knows how to cut lawns. So again, email me. We'll get to know each other. We can jump on a call if you have any further questions, or I might have further questions for you. Thanks for sticking around watching the video on evictions. I'm sure I'll do more in the future on this. Remember, rent is due. The first is coming. Subscribe below. Click the bell notification for my next video. We're putting these out every single week in the year of 2025. See you then.